And I was so worried about the HDR implementation, absolutely worried, because after I watched some pre-released footage back then, a couple of weeks, months ago, and you should never do this. I will never do this and watch some videos or whatever, crappy recorded videos on Twitter and YouTube. I mean, watch my videos, okay, because we have great HDR recording today. But the footage back then was just absolutely terrible. Not in terms of bitrate, but the picture was absolutely washed out. The whole game had no contrast, was washed out, looked absolutely horrible in terms of contrast, brightness, whatsoever, colors. I don't know. It was absolutely terrible, and I was wondering if maybe the same guy who designed the filter for Starfield was working on Forza. I really sincerely thought maybe that's the same person. But after I tested the game now for several hours on the PC and the Xbox, I can assure you, the HDR implementation in this game is one of the best what you're going to see. Hello my friends and welcome back to my channel. The first question I like to answer is, does Forza supports the HDR system level calibration on the Xbox and PC? And the answer is actually yes. That means when you set up your HDR calibration on your Xbox or PC, the game will actually take this setting over, but you can change this setting in the game all the time. So there is no need actually to set up the HDR system level calibration on the Xbox or PC to change the maximum peak brightness in the game. And now let's take a closer look on the HDR in-game settings what we have in Forza. And the first setting is called brightness, and this setting can increase or decrease the average picture brightness and also the shadow details. And the next setting what we have is called HDR Brightness, and this setting is responsible for the maximum peak brightness in specular highlights, and you can set up this setting up to 10,000 nits. If you have a TV with 10,000 nits maximum peak brightness, go for it. And before we now talking about the brightness setting and what it is changing exactly, I like to jump ahead and I like to talk about the HDR black level rays, what we don't have in this game. And yes, you heard me correct, there is no HDR black level rays in this game, not on the PC version and not on the Xbox version. And I verified this actually a couple of times because I couldn't believe it in the first place. But have a look on the brightness diagram at the moment and you can see that we're actually reaching 0 nits at some point, especially here. It is absolutely great in terms of contrast. And now I like to talk about the brightness setting because the brightness setting is doing something very interesting. And if you now think that when you increase brightness that it will lift the HDR black level floor, no, you're actually not quite right. I mean, you get more shadow details for sure, but we still have almost perfect HDR black. I mean, we're reaching still 0. When you can see here this right now, or have a look on the brightness diagram, this is just perfect, and this right now is with brightness set to 1. It is just still a perfect HDR experience. Of course, the picture right now is a little bit washed out because we increasing or we raising the whole gamma, but the game still maintains a perfect HDR black level floor. So that means that you can change the brightness setting actually as you like it, but I would still recommend not to go below 25 and not go above 75, because at some point it's just a little bit too much and you get a very dark picture or a very washed out picture. But the good news is that in regards or in terms of the HDR black level rays, this game is just amazing. And now let's talk about the maximum peak brightness setting in this game, and there is a little bit of a difference between PC and Xbox, and I would say we're starting with the PC version, what you can see here right now. I have set the maximum peak brightness in the game menu or in the HDR settings menu to 1000 nits, and what you can see here right now on the max CLL data, it is actually perfect on the spot. Maximum CLL is 1008, I think it was 1008.7 nits. Okay, slightly too much, but you get my point. It's actually on the spot exactly what we like to have, because what we don't want to have is that our maximum peak brightness is jumping around like crazy and we don't know what we have to set it to. But in this case on the PC, it's on the spot. All what you have to do is know the maximum peak brightness of your TV, set up the maximum peak brightness, and you're good to go. The maximum peak brightness behavior on the Xbox Series is slightly different compared to the PC version. What you can see here right now is that the game outputs a maximum CLL of 860 nits, but this is with my setting in the HDR menu on the Xbox to 1000 to match actually my LG G2. So what I found is we need to increase this by roughly 150 to actually come closer to 1000 nits, what we like to see for the LG G2. And the maximum peak brightness or the average picture brightness in this game is just great. All what you can see here right now in colors is actually above HDR brightness. All what it is grayish, it is HDR brightness. So you can see there is a lot of information on the screen actually in HDR brightness. That means above 200 nits or above HDR brightness. And this is exactly what we like to have when we play a game in HDR. I really like the implementation here, and this makes it actually also very, very simple to recommend later on, and we are not quite there yet, but to recommend later on to use HGiG. But before we now talking about HGiG, dynamic tone mapping on and off, and of course Dolby Vision on the Xbox Series, let's talk about colors. Let's talk about HDR colors. And what we can see at the moment is just a very grayish black and white picture. And unfortunately, that means we're just operating in the HDR color range. There is, so far as I can tell, no HDR color range in use, at least not during gameplay. And now let's talk about HGiG, dynamic tone mapping on, off, and of course Dolby Vision gaming on the LG OLED TVs. But there is no native Dolby Vision support in this game. That means between HDR10 and HGiG and Dolby Vision, there shouldn't be any difference. And my recommendation for this game is actually quite simple. Use HGiG if you like it or if you can. Of course you can use dynamic tone mapping on. I would not recommend to use dynamic tone mapping off because you would have just very bad specular highlights, okay? So between HGiG, dynamic tone mapping on, we know what is the main difference. Dynamic tone mapping on will change the average picture brightness all the time. That means when you play now or when you race in the night, and usually it should be dark, dynamic tone mapping on will just over brighten the picture, in my opinion, way too much. So my recommendation for this game is use HGiG. And now let's talk about my recommended settings for Forza Motorsport on the Samsung S95C, LG CX, G2 and G3. Of course for the PC version and the Xbox version. And I mentioned already that I really do like HGiG in this game. That's why my recommendation is on the OLED TVs, on the LG OLED TVs, use HGiG if you like. Leave the brightness setting on your TV to 50 because that's the standard factory setting, and do not change anything on the FTDA, the fine-tuned dark area settings, because I found there is no need for, because we don't have any HDR black level rays in this game. For the in-game settings in the game, there is a little bit of a difference between PC and Xbox, as I have shown you. Just make sure that you set the maximum peak brightness or the HDR brightness in the game on the Xbox slightly higher than on the PC, or slightly higher actually than the maximum peak brightness of your TV. That means if you have an LG CX with a maximum peak brightness of around 800 nits and you play this game on the Xbox, then set the HDR brightness in the game to 950. For the brightness setting in the game, which is the average picture brightness or the shadow details, I would actually recommend to leave it at 50, but you can change this setting as you like it. If you like to have a little bit of a darker picture or better contrast, then change it to, let's say, 25. Or if you like to have a brighter picture, then change it to 75. I would not go above 75 or below 25, because then you end up with either a very dark picture and you're crushing actually some details in shadows, or you end up with a very bright picture and it looks a little bit washed out. For the Samsung S95C, and when you play the game on the PC, set the HDR brightness to 1800. When you play the game on the Xbox, then just increase this setting slightly to 1950. For the brightness setting on the S95C counts the same as for the LG OLED TVs. A value between 25 and 75 is in my opinion okay, but you can change this setting as you like it. Moving on to the TV setting for the S95C, I would change I would use the HDR tone mapping set to static, contrast enhancer off, ST2084 -1 and shadow detail 0. Okay, my friends, so what is my quick summary? HDR implementation in Forza is just superb in my opinion. Absolutely no issue at all. Not in terms of black level rays, not in terms of the specular highlights. Okay, the Xbox Series X version has a slightly lower maximum peak brightness with the exact same setting as the PC version, which is a little bit surprising, but this is not a big deal because now we know it, we can actually increase the setting slightly, so all good. This is just amazing. This is just amazing, and I haven't touched all the games, or I haven't played all the tracks. That's what I meant, because and this is by actually my favorite track. To be very honest, I like this track, Lacuna Seca. I'm a big fan. But anyway, there are so many tracks, and what I like in this game is actually that you can start with a free run or free play. Immediately after the intro, you can just choose any track, any car, and you just start playing. And this is what I love, and that's why it was so easy actually to do testing, because if you have to wait and do a campaign where you progress and whatsoever, and then you can just play a couple of tracks, it's a little bit annoying when you like to test a couple of things. Okay, so this again in terms of HDR, wow, amazing, superb, awesome. Just play it.